everyone. Welcome to another Built on Blockchain segment where we've welcomed back our special guest, David from Covalent's team. How are you doing today, David?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, it's exciting. So I know that you recently published another research paper. Would you be able just to tell the audience just some key points that we'll be talking about? That way they get a better idea of what to expect.
Yeah, so the recent research report was done on the Optimism ecosystem, and more specifically, what makes them special, which is the OP stack and their Superchain vision. So today I'd be happy to go over some of that and also the teams that are building on Optimism and why they chose to deploy on the Optimism ecosystem.
Okay, perfect. So looking forward just to breaking that down because I know it was an in-depth article from what I was looking at. But before we dive into that, it would be great if you could provide an overview of the current state of layer 2 solutions on Ethereum and also just touch on the challenges they face in achieving scalability.
Yeah, so when we talk about Ethereum, we have to think big, right? We want this to be as huge as the internet. That's the whole vision of our industry. But currently the problem is none of these layer 2 solutions can achieve this vision of being the next internet. And, especially if you're a developer, you're making a dApp, you've only got a few choices and they each have their trade-offs. So first, you could deploy directly on Ethereum's layer 1. That's great, but it compromises scalability because, Ethereum's layer 1 has high costs and also low throughput. So that presents a lot of challenges. Option 2, you could go for a specific layer 2 solution on Ethereum. That's a better choice. It's more scalable, but then you become locked into that particular ecosystem. And the last choice you could get is you could take matters into your own hands and build your own app chain or manage your own chain. But that comes at a cost too, right? Because then liquidity gets fragmented. You're not connected to other ecosystems and you have more technical burden to handle. The biggest challenge, I guess, is achieving interoperability between these chains. And, we live in a world where there's a lot of cross-chain bridges right now, and a lot of them have vulnerabilities and have been exploited by malicious actors. So this really puts developers and users in quite a challenging situation. And this is really a problem in layer 2 right now.
Okay, so what is the significance of optimism in the Ethereum landscape, and how does it aim to address the scalability issues that you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So for context, Optimism is an optimistic rollup, and it has two big missions. So number one is making Ethereum super scalable, and number two is being the champion of funding for public goods. So they've had some really groundbreaking innovations this past year, such as Bedrock, the OP stack, and also the Superchain. And many in the industry currently think that these will completely change the Ethereum landscape and solve those issues. And, we saw Coinbase's Base adopting the OP stack and other big names like WorldCoin building on Optimism. And they're choosing the Optimism stack for a reason, right? So what makes it super exciting is that the OP stack is aiming to become the blueprint for all layer 2 solutions. And also the Superchain is aiming to solve and abstract all of the problems for developers and users that they're facing currently right now that we mentioned earlier. So this is why Optimism is such trending narrative right now and why so many people are talking about Optimism.
Okay, interesting. So I know you mentioned rollups. Would you be able to explain the concept of rollups and how they contribute to reducing Ethereum's transaction costs and congestion?
Yeah, more than happy to. So rollups are basically a scaling solution for Ethereum. We all know that. And how it came about is, after a bunch of digging and experimenting, Ethereum's researchers, they finally stumbled upon these things called rollups. And they think that this is the best way to make Ethereum more scalable on the layer 2. So what rollups do is they bundle and group a ton of transactions together into batches. And instead of dealing with each transaction one by one, Ethereum's mainnet just processes all of these batches all at once. So this makes Ethereum way cheaper to use and it also clears up all the traffic jams that happen on the mainnet. So currently, rollups are the preferred solution to make Ethereum work faster and also smoother, and many teams are building rollups and adopting this technology.
Okay, so who are the actual key individuals behind the development of Optimism? And would you happen to know the previous experience that they bring to the project?
Yeah, so the founding team of Optimism is actually super interesting. So the founders are Kyle Floresh, Jinglan Wang, and also Ben Jones. And they're actually not new to the Ethereum ecosystem at all. Previously, they teamed up and they were working on this thing called Plasma, which is another Ethereum scaling solution. So they have tons of experience and also tons of knowledge working in this industry. So all of their years of brain power and creative thinking, working in Plasma and also Ethereum, are now all poured into making Optimism as cool as it is. So there's definitely a really strong team behind the Optimism Foundation, and also an even better team that's working on it together. So, there's way more people than just these three, but these are obviously the founders of the Optimism Foundation.
Okay, that's pretty neat. Thanks for going through that. So, what sets Optimism apart in terms of governance and token distribution compared to other layer 2 solutions?
Yeah, this is actually what I think is the most interesting part about Optimism, is that they take such a different approach to governance. So unlike other layer 2 teams or even like layer 1 teams, Optimism didn't just do a single airdrop and call it a day. That's what a lot of people kind of use these chains for. They farm airdrops. They kind of recognize this and they went for something way more sustainable. And it's something called retroactive public goods funding, or retro PGF for short. When a user transacts on OP Mainnet, the profits generated from the network sequencing fees are then used to fund public goods through retroactive public goods funding. And better public goods mean more development, which creates even more revenue that can be directed to public goods in the long run. So really the genius of retroactive public goods funding and the OP token is that it isn't a one-time deal, right? It's an ongoing process that continuously encourages people to keep contributing to open source software and also keep creating public goods for the betterment of the entire ecosystem. So this constant flow of public goods and funding and also support is really what makes Optimism stand out and what will make Ethereum successful in the long run.
I think from what I recall is in June, they talked about some kind of upgrade with Bedrock. Would you be able to delve a little bit deeper into the Bedrock update and also the impact it's had on the OP mainnet and the broader Ethereum ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. So in June, they revealed upgrading their mainnet to Bedrock. And Bedrock is this big milestone that they've had internally, which introduces like a bunch of improvements to the OP stack and also to Optimism. So actually, Bedrock created the OP stack, and it basically aimed at creating a robust and customizable code base. And during the entire Bedrock development, the entire team's focus was on code simplification and standardization. And it was actually inspired by this person called George Hotz. He's the person behind Comma AI, which worked also and advised the OP Labs team. So basically, Bedrock is a new code base for Optimism that gave birth to the OP stack, and it has less code, which means there's fewer chances for unintentional bugs. So they were able to achieve this clean and minimal code base actually by reusing a lot of the existing Ethereum code. So that not only ensures security from battle-tested code from Ethereum, because everyone uses Ethereum, but also it makes the development environment similar and familiar for devs. So this is really what Bedrock is. And the advantages it brings, there's so many advantages, right? So first, it uses the open source Go Ethereum as Optimism software, so Geth. And because of this, it brings Optimism, the OP stack, and any fork on it, lower fees, faster deposits, a modular proof system, also optimized node performance, and more importantly, closer Ethereum equivalent. So it's closer to Ethereum than ever. And this is the Bedrock upgrade. And I know I mentioned the OP Labs a lot in this and the Optimism Foundation, but it wasn't just a one-man show. Actually, lots of people from the community came together and contributed to this Bedrock upgrade. So there's folks from Base, like Jesse Polak, who contributed to major code improvements. Also, Test and Prod, they made OP Aragon, which is the OP Stack's first alternative execution client. And also, we have folks from A16Z, like Citron, Noah Citron, who engineered Maggie, and that is the OP Stack's first alternative consensus client. So there are many people that came together to make this Bedrock upgrade happen. Obviously, OP Labs was a big part of it, but really there was a lot of teamwork involved, and this is kind of the beauty of the Bedrock upgrade that gave birth to the OP Stack, that it was a community and team effort. And, they say teamwork makes the dream work. So the OP Stack is definitely a contribution of many people, and that's what makes it so brilliant. Yeah.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. I'm curious, how does the OP stack differ from traditional layer 2 solutions? And could you talk a little bit about the advantages that it offers developers?
Mm-hmm. So the OP stack is basically like an ultimate toolkit for creating a modular blockchain. So it's entirely open source for anyone to use, And it's also MIT licensed, which means it's super easy to fork and also play around. It's unlike any other layer 2 solution because it's not a layer 2, but more like a blueprint, right? It's similar to the ERC20 token standard, but for rollups. So imagine it as a carefully curated collection of software components, and they're all maintained by the Optimism collective. So, these components, they do all sorts of things from setting up the foundation for a new layer for a chain to fitting into a chain like a puzzle piece. So we're talking about governance, settlement, execution, derivation, sequencing, data availability, you name it. So these are all modules and layers within the OP stack that you can pick and choose. And for developers, that's great because it's like having a selection of ready-made options, and it saves them a lot of time from reinventing the wheel every time they want to start a new rollup. And the cool part is this makes the OP stack really flexible. So that means that each piece of this tech puzzle can be upgraded or swapped out over time. So for instance, you could support ZK proofs for settlement on the OP stack, creating an OP stack ZK rollup. And with the OP stack, you could go from a regular optimistic rollup with a fault prover, obviously, and switch to a ZK rollup of a ZK prover. And you could even have multiple provers doing their thing all at once. So the possibilities really are endless here. And this modular design means that at every level, you can mix things up and create exactly the rollup you need. And like I mentioned, this is awesome for developers because, it's super easy to use, super accessible, super easy to experiment with. And it's like an open invitation for them to dive in, tinker around, and come up with brand new rollups. So this also creates a really nice flywheel effect because the more developer play with it, the better it gets. So, as a developer launches their rollup on the OP stack, they will contribute to the shared code base because obviously they're building on it, which makes the whole experience even better for the next wave of developers. So it's a virtuous cycle where everyone's learning and improving together on these rollups.
That was a lot of great advantages for developers. In regards to the Superchain, do you have any more details on how it aims to address scalability issues without introducing the systematic risks?
Yeah. So with the OP stack and its code base out in the wild under the MIT license, of course, it's kind of sparked a Cambrian explosion, but for the rollup world. So lots of different versions of rollups are popping up, like a bunch of new species, all thanks to the OP stack. And these forks collectively contribute to the Superchain, which is Optimism's ambitious vision for layer 2 future. So what the Superchain is, it's this cohesive interconnected network made up of all these individual chains built on the OP stack called OP chains. And these chains, they're all linked together through technological threads and also social threads. So imagine it like a city where everyone's working together, sharing ideas, and aiming for collective wins. As I mentioned earlier, in our current blockchain landscape, it's promising, but it's not quite there yet. It's not the new internet yet. And this is because a single rollup, no matter how efficient, it hits a limit because of hardware constraints. And if you take a multi-chain approach, you create a lot of systematic risks, right? There's crazy amount of money being hacked from bridges up in the billions. And, there's a lot of standards and lots of different chains, and it gets really messy. So the super chain is this hybrid, right? It's not just a single chain. It's not a complicated tangle of multiple chains, but it's the perfect blend of both. And one of the coolest things it's bringing to the table is this feature called atomic cross-chain transactions. And it lets different OP chains under the super chain talk to each other and for the sequencers to produce blocks across multiple chains at the same time. So there's no more need for cross-chain bridges, and it introduces this new level of security and user experience where the boundaries between these chains dissolve. So in this superchain future, chains will become more like compute resources, and for developers, they can effortlessly scale their apps across multiple chains without the usual headaches and extra costs. So it basically abstracts this concept of separate chains for developers and users, and moving between these OP chains will be as easy between switching websites today. So that's the vision that Optimism has for their superchain.
Okay, but what would be the benefits for chains to join the superchain? And what is the law of chains?
Yeah, so every chain that's built using the OP stack is welcome to join the superchain, but first they have to adhere to this set of community-driven guidelines called the law of chains. So the law of chains is basically like the Optimism community's way of upholding the OP chain's values and outlining how these OP chains can contribute to public goods and also promote decentralization. So why would you want to join a superchain? There's some really good benefits. So for example, when there's a protocol upgrade in the works, it doesn't just benefit one chain, but it's seamlessly pushed across all of the superchains participating chains. So there's no more silo development or, maintenance by yourself. It's like having the shared brain power from all of the teams across the Superchain on your team. So that's a huge bonus, right? And also with the Superchain, everyone's collaborating to make sure that essential services like indexing, such as Covalent and sequencing, for example, Espresso, are not just high quality, but also affordable. And, there are many, many more benefits, but at the end of the day, the OP stack is free to use. There's no strings attached. If your team decides to opt in to the law chains, you just have to contribute some sequencer earnings to the collective so they can continue funding public goods and supporting these initiatives that benefit everyone. But yeah, it's going to be totally optional. And the freedom to opt in and opt out of this arrangement is actually a feature. So it's intended. And this is all because it gives the teams the freedom to choose, but while also building a strong community at the same time of those that share Optimism's vision. So I really think that Optimism is doing a great job here, and they took a lot of lessons from the early days of Ethereum's governance, as they know that, having everyone on the same page, especially the stakeholders that matter and buy into the same vision is key, right? And, by creating these public goods and also rewarding the people that do contribute to the Superchain, Optimism is really building an environment where everyone wins. And there's a lot of layer twos already hopping on the OP stack and joining the Superchain as OP chain. So things are definitely looking very exciting.
Yeah, definitely. What are some examples of OP chains that are part of the superchain? And would you also be able to talk a bit about the specific focuses within the blockchain ecosystem?
Yep. Let's dive into some of the OP chains within the Superchain and buckle up because there's going to be quite a few of them. So we'll start with the OP Mainnet because that's the OG first member of the Superchain. And why don't we also showcase some on-chain data behind each of these chains? First, for the OP Mainnet, we can see here on the chart here that it has experienced an impressive 81% surge in its 7-day average transaction count. And in the second chart here, it shows that when compared with Arbitrum, Optimism's daily active addresses are actually on an upward trajectory, especially after Arbitrum's airdrop. Their activity has kind of declined, actually. So that's the OP mainnet. The next up on the scene, we have Base. So Base is incubated by Coinbase. We all know that. And they're aiming to be the home for the next billion users. So they're a super exciting new ecosystem. And Base isn't just a member of the Superchain. They're also a core developer of the OP stack. And they're also setting the bar very, very high in terms of being a member of the Superchain. So what they're doing is they're pledging a share of their earnings back to the Optimism Collective, which will be the greater value between 2.5% of their total sequencing revenue or 15% of all their transaction profits. So they're really setting the standard and leading the way for showing other OP chains and other teams joining the Superchain on how they can contribute back to the collective. And for me personally, I think Base was one of the most exciting chain launches of the year. And I really think that it's well positioned to attract a lot of new users because of Coinbase's great reputation, right? And we can see here that Base is actually the fastest layer 2 to reach 100,000 users. They did this in only 56 days post-launch. So that's the fastest it's ever been done. So that's really impressive. And in the second chart, we can see that Base has already surpassed Arbitrum, Polygon, and even OP Mainnet in daily transaction count. So this really reinforces its promising position as a new chain in the space backed by Coinbase. Next, let's talk about the Zora network. So Zora is a special OP chain all about NFTs. So in contrast to many layer 2s that mainly focus on DeFi, Zora is actually building an ecosystem that puts NFTs first. So they have a focus of bringing culture and creativity on chain, and they offer a toolkit that lets creators transform artworks, songs, videos, podcasts, memes, anything you could dream of into NFT collections. And as we can see here, since its inception, Zora has already had 4 million ERC-721 tokens minted. And here it shows that there are more than 800,000 addresses collecting Zora NFTs. So again, this really highlights the reach and impact of the Zora network in the NFT landscape and how it's absorbing a huge chunk and huge share of NFT activity as a whole in the industry.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, right. So next up, we have Public Goods Network, PGN for short. And they also have a unique niche. They're focusing on creating durable funding for public goods in the Ethereum ecosystem. So kind of similar to Optimism, but also they have their own thing going on with Gitcoin. They're unique because most of their net sequencer profits, not just a small percentage, but most of them are going to supporting public goods and projects that are doing good for the entire Ethereum space. So it shows here that towards the end of August, PGen had a huge surge of daily active users. And, this corresponds to a increase in gas revenue generated here in the second chart. So this revenue will really be used to further development of public goods as stated in PGen's mission. And it also showcases PGen's commitment to the Ethereum ecosystem. And last but not least, we have Mode. And Mode is exciting because they're a growth-first OP chain. That's how they're positioning themselves. And they're all about rewarding users and developers who fuel the growth of Mode and the broader Superchain ecosystem. So their ambitious goal is to create on-chain frameworks that, redefine the ecosystem growth playbook that so many teams are using today. And, it's been used so much that it's starting to look all the same. What they're trying to do is they're giving network sequencer profits back to contributors. So they're drawing a lot of the strategies they've honed over the past 2 decades from their internal team. And we can see here that Mode's testnet has seen substantial increases in daily, weekly, monthly active activities. And in the next chart here, we can see that as of mid-September, Mode's active addresses have already surpassed its total for August. So they've done a really good job of getting new users, but also maintaining a strong foundation of returning and loyal users. And we could go on and on. There's more OP chains like Lyra Chain for derivatives and Ancient 8 Chain for gaming, but that's too much to cover for today. So feel free to check them out in the full research report, which I'm sure Jackie will link below.
You weren't joking when you said to buckle up.
Yeah, I know. There's a bunch.
Yeah, I'm sure that analysts and developers can appreciate just all of this information broken down that you shared. But yes, we'll definitely share the link to your research paper if they want to read more into the other chains down in the description below. And for the next question, I wanted to ask you more on your thoughts. What role do you envision the OP stack playing in the broader context of app chains and layer twos? And why has Optimism been so successful?
Yeah, of course. So, we've talked about all those OP chains we have in the Superchain, but really the exciting part is that there are even more OP stack forks that exist. So they aren't a part of the Superchain, but they're built using the same OP stack. And, some examples are OPBNB, Mantle, Metis, Boba, and there's a bunch more that Covalent is partnered up with. I think what's interesting is that app chains and app-specific rollups aren't new concepts, but what makes Optimism and the OP stack special is that they're bringing all these ideas to the EVM. And, why does that matter? Because EVM is really where all the action is. All the wallets, validators, bridges, nodes, you name it, they're all aligned with the EVM. So being EVM compatible gives the OP stack forks and any team building on the OP stack a massive boost. And I think in crypto, it's not just about having the best tech, it's also about building a community. In today's landscape, it's not enough just to have good technology. You also have to have developers, projects, users, all in on an ecosystem, right? That's what really makes an ecosystem vibrant. And what the OP stack has done is they've built that strong community with people that make the ecosystem lively, that are contributing, that are sharing ideas. And therefore, I think the OP stack is great, not because it's just a good technological play. They have good technology. They have many contributors who've built out the code base and the stack, but it's also a great project because of the community. So it's also a strong community play. And that's why I think they've been so successful and onboarding so many big names and teams that want to build alongside them.
Yeah, I can definitely see that and agree. And it's nice for you to talk about like the community aspect of things. For competition, I'd like to dive a little bit more into that. How do you see competition among different layer 2 solutions shaping the future of the Ethereum ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think all the buzz around layer 2 solutions getting louder. I think it's pretty clear that layer 2s will dominate the next cycle as layer 1s did the previous cycle. Everyone was talking about Solana and all these layer 1s. I think the next upcoming cycle will all be about layer 2s. It's going to be like this because unlike layer 1s, which sometimes rely on new and less reliable trust assumptions, layer 2s inherently, they have Ethereum's robust security. And they have added perks of lower transaction fees and faster finality. So I think layer 2s are definitely the future of Ethereum. And in terms of competition and rollups, I think the more the merrier, right? More rollups are a good thing. And, it's great that the OP stack makes launching these new rollups such a breeze. And even better, there's rollup as a service platforms now, such as Conduit and Caldera, which makes deploying a new rollup or a new OP chain a plug and play operation, right? So it's just a couple of clicks and then you can spin up your own rollup. So I think what Optimism has done and contributed in terms of the whole layer 2 landscape is they haven't just made a marginal improvement in launching a rollup. They've made a quantum leap in accelerating development of any rollup. So this ultimately benefits the Ethereum ecosystem because I think, the more rollups, the better. Not all of them are going to survive, but I think it's important to have a lot that are competing and are aiming and striving to be the best one possible. And ultimately, this will benefit users.
Yeah, that's insane. So I guess calling it kind of like L2 wars in that context, how do you think Optimism positions itself amongst the other layer twos?
Yeah, it's great that you brought up the L2 wars because it definitely seems like it because the OP stack is definitely not alone. Optimism is a part of a larger movement that includes other heavy hitters like Polygon, Arbitrum, ZK Sync, and each of them are bringing their own unique scaling solution to the table. So the counterpart to Optimism's OP stack is Polygon's CDK, right? And they recently onboarded Immutable, A-Star, Cancel, Palm, Gnosis, and a bunch more. And for Arbitrum, they have the Arbitrum Orbit, which is L-free solution. So they have 8 L-frees currently in development. And also ZK Sync, they have their own hyperchain scaling solution. So there's definitely many options out there. And I think for developers, this is good because now you can pick and choose whatever suits your goals the best, right? You don't have to go for the OP stack. You could go for Polygon CDK if you want, or you could go for Arbitrum L-free. And you could just create any customized setup, just like building a website, right? Like you could go to Squarespace, and you could go to Wix. It's that straightforward. You got lots of options, and it's always good to have more options for a developer and for users because then you're not locked in or stuck with just one solution. So I think the more the merrier, like I mentioned, the more vibrant, the better. Now, with all this talk about the layer 2 wars, I think it's also easy to get caught up and forget the bigger picture, right? Which is the overarching mission of our industry. I think, as an industry as a whole, what we're trying to do is rewrite the rules of how things are with the internet. So it's about shifting from a web ruled by big corporations chasing profits to an internet that's governed by decentralized and open source principles. And this shift isn't just a utopian dream. There's actually real challenges that we're facing that is the reason for us doing this. Like there's global coordination failures, and there's also an urgent need to fund public goods. So I think under this bigger context, Optimism's OP stack is really well positioned because they're here to help us align profit with impact, as we can see with their retroactive public goods funding. And also, they're also here to help us build a more open and decentralized version of the internet by putting the community first, by putting these principles first. So I think how they stand out is being the most Ethereum aligned, most crypto native, and also most in tune with the crypto values, right? Of being decentralized and funding public goods and all of the above. So that's how I think Optimism stands out.
Wow, I'm gonna have to like take that quote. I love how you talked about like the values and everybody working together towards shifting that landscape or how things have been done. So I know you touched a little bit on just developers, and this is probably a question that they're going to have. How can developers and projects get involved with the OP stack and Superchain? And are there opportunities that they offer?
Yeah. So I would say first up, head over to the Optimism docs at stack.optimism.io. It's a great starting point with all the resources and knowledge you need. And if you're a developer looking for data on all of these OP chains or OP stack forks, you can go on covalenthq.com/docs, where you can find all of the documentation for all of the OP chains and OP stack forks that we support as well. We cover pretty much all of these chains that is built using the OP stack. So I think if you're a developer and you're looking to launch your own rollup and you're already familiar with the OP stack, I think the best way is to jump in and just launch your own Bedrock based rollup. So there's also a handy guide on the Optimism docs page called Running a Bedrock Rollup. And that basically walks you through the entire process of launching your own rollup step by step. And the best part is that it's going to be compatible with the Superchain. So that's going to be great because you can join all of these other big names in forming this mesh of OP chains that are under the Superchain vision. And what you can also do is play around with the OP stack by switching out its different components, like I mentioned. Mantle, for example, did this. They took out the data availability layer and added eigenlayers, data availability layer. So there's a lot you can do here, but do note that if you start making big modifications to the OP stack and switching layers, you might drift away from that compatibility with the Superchain. But yeah, that's also fine because, like I mentioned, the OP stack is your DIY rollup blueprint. You can do what you want with it. It's open source. It's a lot of fun, but it's also up to you to build whatever you want. So I would say, yeah, go ahead and experiment. But remember, any modifications to stack come with a little bit of a risk factor, and you could not be compatible with the Superchain. But that's totally fine as well, because we've seen many successful projects as well that have modified it and are, growing very fast as well.
Yeah, that's great. Developers, start building. Are there any other kind of like closing thoughts that you have?
I'll just say, if you would like to learn more, this is just a snippet of the entire research report. Jackie should be able to link the PDF and also the link to the full post below. I think there's no better time than ever than now to build on the OP stack and also explore other Ethereum L2 scaling solutions like Polygon CDK or Arbitrum L-Freeze or hyperchains. There's many possibilities out there. Definitely go check them all out before making a decision. Yeah.
Perfect. I always enjoy these sessions. This was a really in-depth one and just like a lot of information. But before we close it off, for anybody who's interested in signing up for the free API, you can just go to this QR code right there. And just remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this session. If you have any questions about David's research paper or all the other topics or the previous ones that he's done, please throw it in the comments. We will definitely share it with him. But looking forward to having you on the next session and hope you have a great day, David. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thank you so much as always.
All right. Bye, guys.